This video continues the examination of the relationship between suppliers and buyers from the point of view of various market structures. So again, we're thinking of the firm in the role of a buyer and its relationship to suppliers, and we're going to think about the various factors that influence their relative market power. In this case, I'm considering a situation where we can say that things are fairly balanced. I would argue here that no firm has a significant bargaining advantage over any other one. Let's just think about why. On the seller's side, we've got many firms selling differentiated products. And on the buyer's side, we also have many firms which have different characteristics. And again, the term that's used in a situation where we've got many buyers, but the buyers may be in different locations and may have different characteristics. We don't want to say that they're identical, so we can use the term monopsonistic competition to describe that market structure. Well, I guess I'm thinking that because there's many firms on the buying side, many sellers on the selling side, unless we have some further information, perhaps about switching costs or something like that, no one is going to have any significant bargaining power. What sort of example am I thinking of here? Well, perhaps this could describe a certain kind of labor market. Suppose, for example, that the industry is one of many firms that are hiring workers who have some similar skills. So the workers are the suppliers in this case. Imagine, for example, that the firm is a construction company, and there's many construction companies in the industry, and they're hiring skilled workers who may be doing particular tasks. And suppose there's lots of workers and lots of firms. Well, that would be a situation in which we could say that there's a competitive situation and no one has any particular bargaining power over others. Another example might be, let's say, the supply of office space. If there's many firms that are supplying office space in a large city, some of those firms could even be large in absolute size, but as long as there are many other competitors in the market, then we could describe that as monopolistically competitive. On the buyer's side, I was thinking of something like, you can imagine law firms or maybe accounting firms or something like that. There's lots of them located in different places, perhaps with different abilities to pay, but still large numbers on both sides of the market. Well, we could imagine a slightly different market structure. I want to imagine one in which the firm, instead of being in an industry with many other firms, just shares the industry with a few. So that's going to be a situation that parallels the idea of oligopoly, where there are few sellers. Here there are few buyers, and we'll call that oligopsony. In the situation I'm considering, on the supplier side, there's many more firms in the market. So, as you might expect, I'm going to argue that the firm and the few other firms in its industry could well have some significant bargaining power with their suppliers. You might just pause for a moment and see if you can think of some examples. One thing that occurs to me is something like the situation where a lot of sellers are attempting to get large retailers to buy their product, to sell it on to their customers. You could imagine, for example, buyers like Walmart or Amazon, for example, dealing with producers of, say, something like clothing or shoes. We could also imagine, say, an oligopsony that consisted of large supermarket chains selling food and many competitors attempting to get them to carry their food products. Indeed, these are situations in which there could be significant competition among the few firms in this oligopsony, and in order to increase their profits, they may find themselves squeezing their suppliers. In recent years, the greater competition that's emerged between Walmart and Amazon has had them doing exactly that. Well, we could imagine a situation that's even worse for suppliers. Suppose that the firm is the supplier's only customer, a situation called monopsony. So the word monopsony just parallels the idea of monopoly. Well, clearly in that case, the supplier has minimum bargaining power because there's only one outfit to sell to, in this case our firm. Well, what would an example of something like this be? A classic example that's occurred many times in the past are so-called company towns. The case I've illustrated here is one of Hershey, Pennsylvania, where a chocolate factory was begun by a fellow obviously named Hershey back in 1900. Apparently Hershey was one of these benevolent capitalists who wanted to treat his workforce very well, but nevertheless ended up having quite a lot of power over those workers because it was really the main employer in that city. So if we have a situation where the workforce is not organized, where they're not unionized, then the situation that I just described before holds, where we have many sellers in the market and just a single buyer. If those sellers, in this case the workers, unionize, then this market structure changes. So that's why I said that we had a non-unionized workforce here up until 1937. Apparently, in that year, the workforce unionized and had their first strike. I believe that chocolate still continues to be produced in Hershey, Pennsylvania, but in this case, with a different market structure. It would be described like this. Here we would have a monopoly seller, in this case the workers' union, and the company would be the buyer of their labor services. Well, what can we say about bargaining power here? It may look balanced because, after all, we've got a single seller and a single buyer here, but exactly what happens in terms of bargaining power is unclear. It depends perhaps on who's better able to bear the cost of a strike. If the company is in a very strong position, it may be able to hold out for a long time if the workers withdraw their services. Of course, you may be aware of many situations in the past where workers go on strike and the industry attempts to hire replacement workers. And in that case, if they're allowed to do that under the law, that would give them greater bargaining power in that situation. So any time, if I just go back a little bit, any time when we have this kind of situation where we have a single buyer of labor services, there's a lot of incentive for the sellers to get together, form a union, and have this kind of relationship here with their employers. In that case, wages and salaries are determined by collective bargaining. Well, I guess it's time to summarize this. I've produced a table, which I've reproduced and put up on D2L. You can print that off just for your own reference. A table like this doesn't exist in the text, and in fact some of the terms that I've used to describe these different market structures are not in the text either. So what I've tried to do in this table is just summarize both all the various possibilities, the different market structures that buyers and sellers could exist in, and I've tried to summarize who has the advantage in these various cases. I've just made a little footnote here that there are some situations where it's kind of difficult to say just what the outcome is. This will become a little clearer next week when we look at rivalry within the firm's own industry. For example, that's going to give us some idea, in the case of an oligopoly, whether the sellers are going to cooperate or whether they're going to compete against each other. The same goes in the case of an oligopsony, where there's a few buyers. Perhaps they could conspire together and essentially act as a monopsony, or perhaps they would continue to compete against each other. The next video contains a brief discussion of some of the other ideas that might influence the relative bargaining power of suppliers. Here I've just focused on market structure, but we can think of some other things as well.